let's actually talk about feedback feed forward next, and then we'll come back to regular obstacle. So I made this graph when we were in Vegas because we spent ages talking about it. It kind of became like a joke on the trip that no one could understand or easily communicate the difference between feed forward and feedback. And I was trying to explain it to people. This is an event we did at Hideout Studios. We were talking about it for like 20 minutes, and it's one of those things that, again, it's really easy to hear the difference. And we could even start with that. But quite hard to wrap your head around what's actually happening. But again, I think it's good to have an understanding, even just a simple understanding. Let's listen first. And as I've already mentioned, it's going to be very similar to like slowing it down. The same, kind of difference we've had between soft hard knee, RMS peak. So this is feed forward, feedback. I'm just going to flick back and forth and tell me what you hear. Okay. Darker in feed forward. Interesting. Feed forward, more muted, softer. This is applied to detection, right? Yeah, it's just the detection circuit. And I'll explain the difference in a sec. Feedback seems to bring everything forward in the mix. Feedback more classic. Yeah. Feedback more full to me, more low in slight volume. Feedback sounds less compressed. Feed forward sounds more forward. Feedback sounds more laid back. That's a very good summary and also an easy way to remember it. Laid back. It's an interesting way of thinking of it. Feed forward, more sparkle. Feed forward, clearer. Feedback, muffled or warmer or softer. Backwards is softer. Forward is a bit brighter. Kick drum. Feed forward is quieter. Feedback is punchier. Yeah, let's focus on the kick drum specifically. And again, that will be similar to the difference with the high pass filter, where feed forward, getting into like kind of the science of it a little bit more, feed forward is faster, it's more reactive. So it's reacting to that kick transient. It's sucking everything in when that kick comes in. So it has a similar impact to when we were playing around with the high pass filter. So yeah, it is going to bring that kick forward a little bit more. Highs in feed forward are more present. Lows mid sound more present in feedback. Feedback more transients for sure. Feedback almost like a touch of saturation. Yep. So yeah, I would completely agree. Like the high level kind of summary is feed forward is like more precise, more sterile, more reactive. Feedback is like more analog, gooier, vibier. Kind of like the difference between a VCA compressor and a Varimu. One is, yeah, it's like peak. Again, feed forward is more like peak. Where it's like catching those transients more, whereas feedback is like letting the transients through a little bit, but more open, more depth, whereas feed forward is like a bit flatter. So now what is the difference? Again, you don't really need to understand the difference, what's happening under the hood. It's more just how it sounds. And if you imagine now combining feedback and also we're in RMS mode there, which is interesting. If we go into peak mode, it'll be in peak mode. It's a little bit more noticeable maybe, but feed forward is your typical compressor design. Again, if we think of kind of the classic example of like audio comes in, How far below is it, compared to the threshold? Okay, now let's turn that up, turn that down based on the ratio, and then the audio comes out. It's kind of like the logical thing. It's how like a bog standard stock compressor would function as feed forward. Now, interestingly, if you actually look at analog equipment, feedback was around a lot sooner than feed forward. Like for a long time, you could only get feedback compressors. So like 1176, LA2A, Varimu, they're all feedback compressors. Then the later kind of VCA compressors were a feed forward. So like a DBX 160, SSL, bus compressor, that kind of stuff. They're all feed forward. So feed forward is very logical. Feedback, what's actually happening? It's a very small technical change that has quite significant implications. But where feed forward, the detector is looking at what's coming in. So again, if you imagine like this is kind of like a robot or some software we've programmed to just like turn it down when it gets too loud. With feed forward, that robot is looking at the level coming in and then deciding how much to cut based on that. Whereas with feedback, it's actually looking at the output. It's not looking at the input, it's looking at the output. So in terms of signal flow, it's one small change. Really, that's all it is it's moving the detector circuit to the output instead of the input. So in feed forward mode, we have our input, we have our gain reduction element. The detector sees it here. So the level coming in feeds the detector. That then controls the gain reduction element. On feedback, the level actually comes out of, or the signal comes out of the gain reduction element, and that's where the detector sees it. It sees it after it's been compressed, basically. So let's say our input is -10. This gain reduction element's applying like -3 because of stuff that's previously happened. The detector is actually going to see -7 in feedback mode. In feed forward mode, it's seeing what's coming in. It's seeing -10. But in feedback mode, if we've got input -10, gain reduction, doing 3 dB of gain reduction, the detector sees -7. So it becomes, this is where it's kind of like, okay, that's very simple. Like literally this line, this signal flow line has just moved from feeding it from the input to feeding it from the output. But then when you think about that, it becomes kind of, it's kind of crazy. That's why it sounds more musical. The way I would describe it is that it's actually taking into account how much compression it's already done. So if you imagine again this kind of robot in feed forward, it's like it's looking at the input, so it's seeing what's coming in. It's like it's too loud, turn it down. And now it's not going to self-correct in any way. It's just like if that input signal is still too loud, it's just going to keep turning it down. Whereas in feedback, it's like it's too loud, turn it down, and then it can actually see that it's turned it down a little bit. It can see that it's had an influence. So then it doesn't have to turn it down as aggressively. It's like self-correcting in a sense because and that's kind of obvious, right? If you were like a human, like acting as a compressor and you're riding the level manually on like a fader, like turn it down, you probably wouldn't look at the input, right? You would look at the output. It's like, it's too loud, I'm going to turn it down. Okay, now we're good. That's what a feedback compressor is. Feed forward would be like, okay, I'm looking at the level coming in, I'm turning it down, and I'm still just going to keep turning it down, like not considering what you've already done or the impact of what you've already done. So that's one way of thinking of it. It's like it's looking at the input versus the output. Feed forward is looking at the input. Feedback's looking at the output. It's self-correcting because it's looking at the output, so it can actually see how much gain reduction has already been applied and then kind of ease off. And then if we want to look at it on kind of like a graph visual basis, you can kind of play it out sample by sample. So across the bottom here, we've got like samples, and then here we've got level. And then this is like the level coming in. So imagine this is like a transient or something. So samples, we're talking like nanoseconds. One sample at 44.1 kilohertz is like 24 microseconds, not nanoseconds, sorry, microseconds. It would be like 100,000ths of a second. So like very quick. So yeah, this is kind of playing it out sample by sample. And we've got our input. So imagine this is a transient. Most transients, if you really zoom in, it's not actually like an instant burst. There's like a kind of a fade in. So if we go to this snare, for example, and like really zoom in, you can see it's not like instant. There's some material before. Yeah, it peaks maybe here. So like a transient seems instant, but it's actually kind of there is like this phase in period. That's not a great example to be honest, but on this, yeah, just imagine this is the level coming in. So yellow line is the level coming in. So it's like getting louder. Like imagine this is a transient. It gets louder, it peaks, and then it drops off. Like a basically like a very quick sound. And then blue line is our gain reduction. So again, it's purely looking at the input. So the gain reduction is just going to be the inverse of the input. Like input goes up, assuming this is above the threshold, more gain reduction gets applied. So as the volume gets louder, it compresses more. And then the green line is our output, which is like these are kind of like canceling each other out. This is like a brick wall limiter. You can kind of see it's like just limiting it at this level. Now, feedback, because it's looking at the output, this level is coming in. So again, our input is yellow. The first thing to notice is at one sample here, where the input is already loud, there's no gain reduction happening because the compressor hasn't seen it yet. So that first instant gets through, but we're talking about one sample. So it's like not really noticeable. But because the audio needs to go from here to here and then feed back around, it's not going to do anything yet because it hasn't had time to go through this cycle. Whereas on feed forward, it's like catching it ahead of time. So that's why here on our first sample, there's no gain reduction happening yet. Whereas on feed forward, it is because there's, yeah, it's like it's seeing the output. So it has the audio has to get through first. But then after that point, the audio gets louder, this yellow line, the input's going up, and then the gain reduction is clamping down. But it can see here that the output has come down already. So instead of going down more aggressively, it kind of eases off basically because it can see the impact of what it's already doing because it's looking at the output. So imagine if you're just turning it down, you're looking at like the output. Okay, now it's quiet enough. I don't need to turn it down even more. Whereas on the feed forward compressor, it's just going to keep turning it down, this blue line. Here, it turns it down a little bit. On this second sample here, it's like turned it down. The output level has come down a bit. It turns it down a little bit more. The output level has come down again, but it's not as aggressive. It's like self-correcting. It's kind of easing off as it compresses because it can see it's doing its job. Is that making sense? Cool. Weird. The 1176 is feedback, but also one of the fastest. Yeah. So again, this is like that cycle happens very quickly. Like in the digital world, it happens in one sample. So it's only one sample behind. In the analog world, I think it happens like instantly, basically. It's like only constrained by the speed of the components, which is going to be like the speed that electricity travels at. And this is like I'm getting better with like DSP. I didn't program this. I work with a developer, but like my understanding of the digital audio world is like pretty good. But my understanding of the analog world is like less so. I've never built a compressor or anything, but I'm pretty sure it's like instant. Yeah, it's like there is a delay because it has to travel through once before anything happens, but that delay is so quick that it's basically insignificant. The more impactful thing is that it's looking at the output, so it eases off as it kind of clamps down. Or instead of just being like a linear curve where it's just clamping down, it's like, okay, it can see that it's clamping down and then it eases off. So that's why it sounds more musical. In a sense, it's just doing less. It's applying less gain reduction, but we can obviously kind of what we did there was like we matched it so that it was about the same. But it's more natural if you think about it. It's like it's not just kind of bulldozing through and just continuing to compress, even though the output has changed. Instead, it can see the impact of what it's doing, and it can kind of react to the music, react to the compression that's being applied, and in effect, it's like yeah, it's like variable compression. It's self-correcting. And the reason why this was done in early compressors is it was a really simple way to make the compressor more intelligent, effectively, and more reactive. And it actually, yeah, it has a positive, for the most part, a positive impact, which is it sounds like we heard. It sounds more open. It sounds deeper. It sounds more analog. It sounds more quote unquote musical. The downside is like it's less precise. So if you want like a precise, sterile sound, or you're looking to just catch transients and manage transients, so like a limiter, for example, like a feedback limiter would just not really make sense. Or if you're looking for like a more modern sound, a cleaner sound, then you would use feed forward. And generally, yeah, anything that, like if you do want to be super fast, but again, to PJ's point, the 1176, which is a really fast compressor, the attack time on that is around like 20 microseconds, so 0.02 millisecond, 200 thousandths of a second is feedback. So you can still get plenty of reactiveness out of a feedback compressor. And earlier I showed you on the snare, even in feedback mode, it's like a very small difference. We're still, if we have like a really fast attack time, we're still going to catch it. So that's feed forward, feedback, feed forward, feedback. So you can see that slightly more transient is getting through. Again, that first sample gets through unprocessed, and then it's not going to clamp down as aggressively. But you can get fast. You can still get plenty fast. Like you're still going to catch transients. SSL has a reputation of being very musical, but also very punchy in your face. 1176 has a reputation of being very fast, but has loads of depth. So it makes sense to me. Yeah. And the interesting thing about the SSL bus compressor, I used to think of that as like a kind of analog, like GUI compressor. It's actually very, very transparent compared to a lot of other compressors. And that, especially in the later SSL consoles, is what they were going for. And a transparent mixing desk is still nothing like digital. It's kind of got like its own character of transparency. But yeah, that's a feed forward design, and it's actually like compared to like a very mu compressor or something like that, the SSL bus compressor is actually quite transparent. And that's another thing. If you want transparency, if you just want like you don't want that typical kind of compressed sound, then feed forward is going to be a little bit more transparent. The same way like peak is going to be a little bit more transparent than RMS. It's more sterile because of that. But again, it just depends what you're going for and what you're working on. So what is the best use for each type? So one way to approach it is like thinking about different analog models. If you're trying to recreate different models, then it's just if yeah, certain compressors, and again, this is all in the manual. If you're trying to recreate like an SSL bus compressor, then you would go feed forward. If you're trying to recreate an LA2A, you would go feedback. And you can just like Google it or ask ChatGPT, like, what is this compressor? Or refer to the manual. And this tells you like what the kind of topology of all these different classic compressors are. I think of it, ignoring that, if all those different analog models didn't exist, or we think about this from kind of first principles, um, it's all those descriptors that we've already used, and I use feedback a lot, honestly, because I like the sound of compression, so I kind of default to feedback if anything. But if I was looking for uh, if I was using compressor more to catch kind of like transients at the mastering stage, and I wanted something that was a little bit less aggressive than a limiter or a clipper, and I just wanted like a fast compressor just to manage those transients a little bit more, feed forward would be good for that. If I wanted like more transparent compression on like vocals, I might opt for feed forward. But the default mode, again, kind of giving the thinking behind the defaults, when you open up open compressor, it defaults to feedback. And I think it's great. I think it's a very cool kind of mechanically, and I think it sounds great in most situations, and differentiates you from like a stock digital compressor. But if you're working on a lot of electronic music and you wanted a modern sound, then yeah, you might opt to like use feed forward more often. Hip hop, pop, that kind of stuff, you probably generally use more like feed forward. because you want that kind of modern sound. Rock, anything you want to sound older, you would use feedback. And I predominantly work on like rock music, so I use feedback most of the time. But Kevin probably uses feed forward. And for anyone who doesn't know, when I refer to Kevin, I'm talking about Kevin McCloskey. He's one of our mentors. He's a multi-platinum Grammy nominated engineer. But he works on a lot of like hip hop and R&B, and I'm pretty sure he defaults to feed forward. And we've literally spoken about this because he was like, why does Open Compressor default to feedback? Because to him it was like the inverse of what he's used to. So it's also genre dependent. If it's a genre you would imagine people using lots of analog equipment on, like rock, like typically it's like Chris Lord Alge with 100 compressors behind him, LA2As, 1176, that's all feedback. Again, other than like SSL bus compressor, DBX 160, that kind of stuff. Good to move on. So clipping, limiting, without going too into the weeds on like what those do. The cool thing about Open Compressor specifically that the average clipper doesn't have is this oscilloscope down here and this harmonics profile. So clipping is basically distortion. Like that's all clipping is. It's distortion. Like mechanically, it's no different really to adding like a saturation plugin. It is slightly different in how it shapes the waveform, but you'll start to see the similarities here if I play around with like the clipper and the saturator. If I add saturation, you can see how it changes the shape of the waveform, and it's different forms of saturation. So kind of square clipping versus like soft clipping, but it's all distortion. The difference with a clipper is you're effectively controlling that distortion by setting a threshold so that it's only applying distortion when it goes above that threshold. Whereas with odd and even and with saturation, you're applying that distortion to the entire signal. And our control here is basically drive. Under the hood, this is actually doing a combination of drive and kind of like balance. But normally on most saturation tools, like your main control is like either drive or like input, and you're driving it into it, and it's applying distortions to the entire signal by varying amounts. Whereas the clipper is you're saying like if it gets above -3, like distort it enough so that it doesn't actually go above -3. So it squares off the waveform and effectively chops it off. And that also introduces harmonics. So you can see here it's adding odd order harmonics because we're at 1, 3, 5, 7. And if we want to hear how it sounds, let's disable the compressor. Let's go into Delta Solo, and I did this earlier. So you can hear like just where it's grabbing those peaks. And you can also hear it's like very quick. It's not like a compressor where it has like a release stage. It's like if those samples go above that level, it's just chopping them off. But what that also means is if we really drive, it's just distorted because now we're distorting everything above -24, and our level coming in here is like -5. And it will stop anything from going above. So it's like a limiter in that will stop anything from going above that. Now, the nuance of Open Compressor to be aware of, as I've mentioned, is the clipper and the limiter are actually before the compressor. And the benefit of that is you can catch those peaks before they hit your compressor. The thing to be aware of is if you are used to clippers where like, okay, if I set this at -10. So right now I've set my clipper to -10, my output's -10 because I'm not doing any compression. If I start also see we're at -7.9. And normally when you add a clipper, you're used to like the output being at that level, but because the clipper's before the compressor, anything we're doing on the compressor is like changing that level again. But the advantage of that is we can catch those peaks before they hit the compressor. And as we spoke about earlier, that frees you up to use slower settings, use slow attack, release, feedback, RMS, whatever you want, without those overshoots and without pumping. It's also just handy. Like if you want to just use this as a clipper, then you can just like basically disable the compressor, disable the limiter. And you've got a very simple clipper. I use this in mastering now because it's just easy. It's right there. The other thing I like about it is you can see the threshold. So as I pull this down, you can kind of like often I'm visually thinking about like, okay, I just want to catch some of the peaks. So I don't want to catch this stuff or this stuff, maybe just like the top of some of these. You can literally pull it down, see it. And now it's not going to go above that line. And then it's showing you the gain reduction here. My understanding, odd harmonics are more harsh, evens more smooth. Yeah, that's a really common sentiment. I'm not sure I agree personally. I wouldn't describe them as that. Well, yeah, while we're on that topic, we can like literally just do a comparison. So, yeah, I mean, I would describe, if anything, I would kind of describe it as the opposite. Like even is like brighter, but odd is like tape, basically. So like tape saturation is like odd harmonics, and then even is like tubes and valves. So they just have different sounds. I often just try both. Like it's kind of like source dependent. Yeah, odd sound more chaotic. That's fair. Yeah, I like. I kind of, for the most part, just try and forget any like preconceived notions of like how they should sound, and I just like try both depending on the source, and I just find certain source material reacts really well to even, some reacts really well to odd. I often find that I just kind of have a balance of the two. There's a cool preset in here called Studer Tape. Tape is unique. Well, but both tape and tubes, if you drive them enough, you get both. Um, and then like solid state is odd as well, I think. But you again, you can kind of like look this up. This is the cool thing is you can kind of recreate anything. So if you want to know like, is our tube or is tube saturation odd or even harmonics? And it will kind of give you the answer, and then you know how to create it. And it's like with tube, it starts off being lots of even, but then as you drive it a lot more, you'll get more odd harmonics. And then tape is kind of the opposite. Tape, both odd and even, but it is often characterized by odd order harmonics. But then as you drive it harder, it kind of like almost like flips. So that yeah, that's the difference between the two. And clipping is odd. So that's the clipper. Limiter, very similar. All the same stuff before the compressor, catch transfer. So if I turn off the compressor, the difference you can hear with the limiter is there is a release stage. We actually went for quite musical settings instead of like super aggressive, like let's have a limiter that you can use to like slam stuff and get it super loud. We went for like quite versatile musical limiter settings to the point where you can slam it or you can like put it on an individual channel, apply quite a lot of limiting, and it's still going to sound like half decent. So it's actually quite a slow release. I think it's like 300 milliseconds, something like that. Maybe even slower. Yeah, 300 millisecond release. So compared to clipping, So that's the limiter. The detect feature is basically just an easy way to set your clipper and your limiter, and it will find the loudest peak while you have the button enabled. So it's like something you turn on and off. You click it to put it into detect mode. You click it again to put it out of detect mode. It will find the loudest peak during that period, and then it will set the clipper 1 dB below the loudest peak and the limiter 2 dB below the loudest peak. So just think of it as like I'm going to shave off a decibel with clipping, and then I'm going to shave off another decibel with limiting, which is normally how you would do it in mastering. You'd have your clipper first and then your limiter. So if we just leave it in detect mode, so now you can see basically just quick and easy, it's caught these really loud peaks, and it will just give you 2 dB of headroom basically, like in a second or two, depending on, yeah, if you want to get a really big portion of audio, obviously you need to play it for longer, but it's just quick, easy, very subtle. Like that's not going to be very noticeable. If you want to be more aggressive, you can obviously, use the text and then like pull it down from there. For example, if I'm trying to like really pin a vocal into place, I'll do like a dB of 2 of clipping, and then in terms of gain reduction, and then another couple of dB of gain reduction with the limiter, and that'll really help kind of lock it into place. So for that, you'll have to like tune it manually, but especially for like mastering, that detect button is going to be like really handy. But you can use it on anything. So that's what that does. Any questions about clipper and limiter before we move on? And again, you can just see the impact of all of that on this oscilloscope. This is basically visualizing what's happening. What we're going to do in V2 is actually make this like responsive as well, so you can see it kind of moving in real time. But this is just to kind of help you visualize like what you're doing with the clipper, and again, as you add saturation, how that shapes the waveform. So detect is like an auto function that can be used through the whole track. Yeah, you can leave it on. What I do is I'll just grab a portion, or I'll go to like the loudest section basically, turn it on there. Just leave it on, to be fair. But I normally go to loudest. And then disable it. After you detect, can you tweak, or does it start from scratch? No, yeah. So like you saw just there, if I kind of reset these, detect. So it set the clipper to minus 2.16, the limiter to minus 3.16. So that basically means it detected the loudest peak at minus 1.16. But then you can just grab it and do whatever you want with it after that. And then if you want to go back again, you can just. But yeah, you can tweak from there. Just have to take it out of detect mode first. Okay, odd and even, we've basically already covered. That's saturation. And you can see it. If it's turned off, it won't change the visualizers, but you can see it here. As you add it, you can kind of imagine. So at every single frequency, these multiples are being applied. So if there's 50 hertz evident in the audio, you're going to get 50. And then 2 would be 100, and then 50, 100, 200, 400. Yeah, all the multiples. So 2 times 50, 3 times 50, 4 times 50. So you get a lot of new content basically, and this is helping you visualize. And yeah, you can do both. So you can kind of create the balance of the two that you like. And again, I would just have a play around with it. Either just do it by ear, just try both, see what you like. You can go kind of on the left side of the dial for like fullness. So with nothing else on, we can do an A/B. Just, it doesn't sound like saturation. It just sounds like you're adding more depth. You're really opening it up. I really like the sound of this saturation. It took a long time for us to like perfect it because there's a lot of variables in how this kind of works. And yeah, it took a lot of work, but I'm happy with the end result. I find around like 20% is great for like entire mixes. And just like really subtle like depth. Again, what you would expect more from adding like a tape emulator or something. And then beyond that, you can just play around with them. Like if you want obvious saturation, for example, if we have like a vocal that we want to saturate, and get like that kind of distorted sound, like you can absolutely do that. So we can turn off everything else.
Travel down through my bloodstream, got me breaking down a bone and dust. Use fear for a change, fuel for my body. Sick of hearing I should give it up. Is it me or the doubt that keeps talking? It's about time, I think I've had enough. Use fear for a change. Few travel down through my bloodstream, got me breaking down a bone and dust. Use fear for a change, few for my body. Sick of hearing I should give it up.
Yeah, so I think of it as like left side of the dial is like subtler, like enhancement, and then right side is like obvious distortion as a creative effect. And then we've got this tone control as well, which is inspired by a lot of saturation plugins that allow you to adjust tone. Like that was the main reason I wanted the tone control, was so that you could shape the sound of the saturation, but it does apply to the whole track. So this, you can see what it's doing down here. It's also just like a really easy EQ. Like I've actually used it a lot more than I thought I would, because if you've got like surgical stuff you need to do, like, oh, this is, too muddy, I need to cut it at 300 hertz or something like that, then you obviously load up an EQ. But for anything where you just want it a little bit darker, a little bit brighter, just like generally, like I want this to sound brighter, or I want this to sound darker. It's really nice, easy. Like I like the kind of insertion points of the EQ. And it sounds great, like for adding low end to a kick, or if want to brighten up a vocal.
Travel down through my bloodstream, got me breaking down a bone and dust.
It's just, yeah, super easy. So that's tone. And that basically brings us to the end. We've already covered low level, so we don't need to go through that again. In terms of visualizers, low level, you just have the gain reduction ring around the outside like you do with clip and limit. There's no visualizer down here for that. It's reflected in the output level, of course. So if you are bringing something up, it'll show as louder on here. And then tone, yeah, you can see here along with this. And this visualizer is just a frequency spectrum analyzer on the output, so you can see what's going on. So you'll see as I shift this up, we'll like see more high frequency content coming. And again, if you wanted to, you could totally use that as kind of, if you're mastering and you want to have just a frequency analyzer to see where you're at.
They rot my teeth too. Justify.
Compare to references, all that kind of stuff. You can do that here. Cool. Any last questions? Biggest takeaways? What's been like the most helpful? Everything. Awesome. A new kind of channel strip, really. Yeah. I have thought that. Feed forward, feed versus feedback. Awesome. I'm glad that landed, because it's taken me a long time to really understand it enough to be able to communicate it well. They always say, like, if you can't teach it, then you don't truly understand it. So that's great that came across, Stefan. Version 2, hopefully Q1 next year. Someone asked about Black Friday. If you do have any friends who want to get it, we are going to do a Black Friday discount. It will be similar to like the pre-order. I don't think it's going to be quite as much as the pre-order. Similar to like the introductory price. So yeah, if anyone's interested, I would highly appreciate that. And obviously, this is all still very new and brand new company. And yeah, anything, if you guys like it, please do spread the word. And people can just go to woodstockaudio.com. There's like a newsletter sign up there. Um, if anyone wants to stay in the loop. But yeah, you can just point people to woodstockaudio.com. Awesome. All right. Yeah. Look out for an email with the replay, Ken. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for hanging around all this time. Hope you had a blast and learned a ton. I'll see you again soon.